What if I told you that before the God of the Bible, there were other black gods who were erased from history? Prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear may shake everything you believe about faith, spirituality, and the origin of God. Today's topic isn't just controversial, it's explosive. Black gods before Yahweh, the secret that religion has hidden for millennia. For centuries, the history of spirituality has been written, rewritten, and manipulated by hands interested in erasing the ancestral roots of entire civilizations. And one of these most profound manipulations involves the replacement and silencing of ancient black gods worshipped long before Yahweh emerged as a central figure in Hebrew tradition. Few have dared to speak about this, but the evidence is there, hidden in forgotten sacred texts, ignored archaeological inscriptions, and spiritual traditions buried by time and doctrine. Why were these gods erased? What has traditional religion tried so hard to hide? Who were these black deities, and why did they represent a threat to the dominant theological system? These are questions most people never ask themselves or even imagine they should. But today, here in this video, we'll explore the depths of this mystery. Let's travel back long before the formation of Judaism, even before the name Yahweh was first spoken. And let's discover that black spirituality not only existed, it was central, powerful, and influential. Imagine this. Millennia ago, in African and Mesopotamian lands, ancient people connected with deities who had dark skin, African features, and represented wisdom, power, and the creation of the universe. These black gods were at the heart of humanity's earliest spiritual beliefs. But as empires grew and religions consolidated, a new narrative was constructed, a narrative that transformed God into a white European being, far removed from the original image of the first creators. Have you ever wondered why almost all images of God, angels, and even Jesus have been whitewashed throughout history? Have you noticed how biblical history seems to have been shaped to erase references to African deities? It's no coincidence. This is part of a subtle but powerful plan for spiritual and cultural identity reconfiguration. And we're not talking about myths or suppositions. We're talking about real historical records, archaeological discoveries, sacred texts removed from official versions of the Bible, and traditions that survived in secret among peoples who refused to forget their origins. To begin to understand who these forgotten black gods were, we need to take a journey deep into time, long before the pages of the Bible were written, long before the name Yahweh was uttered on any altar or mountain. We're talking about millennia before the formation of the Hebrew people. It's in this distant past, almost erased from school books and religious sermons, that we find the oldest spiritual roots of humanity. And they have color, they have territory, they have identity. They are black African roots. In the most ancient African civilizations such as Nubia, Kush, Aksum, and ancient Egypt, which is an African civilization and not a Middle Eastern one as they try to impose, the idea of divinity was already deeply rooted. Not only did it exist, but it was incredibly complex. Black gods with African features were sacred representations of the cosmos, fertility, death, life, rebirth, wisdom, and the universe as a whole. They were present in every aspect of existence, not just as external entities, but as expressions of the people themselves. They were reflections of black spiritual identity. Consider Osiris, for example, the Egyptian god of resurrection, often depicted with dark skin and linked to the renewal of life and divine justice. Or Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, considered the one who conceived the world through the Word, a clear connection with the power of the Word, long before Christian doctrine attributed this concept exclusively to the Word made flesh in the New Testament. And we also have Anubis, god of the dead, with symbolic characteristics associated with the underworld, spiritual transition, and the preparation of the soul for another dimension. All these gods came from a worldview completely integrated with nature, the cycle of life and ancestry, a vision that did not separate the spiritual from the physical, the divine from the human. One of the most powerful names is Amun-Ra, the god of the sun, creation, and life force in ancient Egypt. His image was frequently depicted with dark skin and a double crown, a symbol of the unity of the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. Amun wasn't just one of many. He was the god of gods, the creator, the absolute ruler of the universe, a black African god worshipped as the creator of the world, long before the concept of Yahweh took took hold among the Hebrews. And when you compare the attributes of Amun with Yahweh, the parallel is disturbing. Both are invoked as the one who is, the invisible. Coincidence or deliberate inspiration? We also have Isis, the great mother, the healer, the protector of children, the goddess of fertility and magic. Her images were so powerful that centuries later they were reinterpreted in Christian icons such as Mary. The cult of the Divine Mother did not originate in the New Testament. It had been present for millennia in Egypt and various parts of Africa. These gods and goddesses formed a pantheon that was not merely decorative but profoundly functional. Each one guided specific aspects of existence, nature, and the human soul. And all had representations that emphasized African aesthetics: dark skin, striking eyes, powerful bodies, golden ornaments, solar and lunar symbols, instruments of spiritual power that connected the human with the divine. Now comes the crucial question: what is the relationship between these gods and Yahweh? The relationship, my dear friends, is one of spiritual collision. Yahweh appears in a context where these gods already reigned. The Torah, especially the books of Moses, is full of express commands for the people not to worship other gods. But who were these others? The text never names them, it only condemns them. This alone is suspicious. It's as if the goal wasn't to debate, but to erase. Have you noticed how, at a certain point in the biblical story, all the gods disappear? All the names that once populated the imaginations of ancient civilizations, all the deities who governed the elements, the cycles of nature, the spirituality of everyday life, suddenly they vanish from the scene. And what remains? A single name: Yahweh. But Yahweh does not appear as a figure of unity, of integration with the other gods. He emerges as the jealous God, the exclusive God, the God who forbids all other worship. This is where the story of Yahweh's rise as the central deity begins, and the spiritual erasure of all that came before begins. Make no mistake, this didn't happen organically. Yahweh wasn't simply accepted because he seemed more powerful or more loving. His imposition as the one true God was the result of a carefully constructed political and religious strategic project over centuries. This project involved rewriting history, silencing traditions, and erasing symbols that could threaten the authority of the new monotheistic faith, especially disconnecting the people from their ancestral spiritual memory. In the beginning, Yahweh was a tribal deity. He was the god of a specific clan, a nomadic people who had no temple, no fixed territory. This people had no political hegemony, but they carried a promise, the promise of becoming a great nation. And how would this promise be fulfilled? Through conquest. Conquest of lands, peoples, narratives. And for this conquest to be successful, the gods of the conquered peoples needed to be considered false, dangerous, or cursed. The Old Testament is filled with passages where Yahweh commands the destruction of altars, the toppling of sacred pillars, and the demolition of temples. He not only requires exclusive worship, he requires cultural extermination. Peoples who worshipped other deities were condemned to death, their traditions banned, their names removed from the records. Why? Because these gods represented something that Yahweh's plan could not tolerate: spiritual diversity. Black gods like Baal, Asherah, El, and others, whose names appear in Hebrew texts, were associated with idolatry, sin, and perdition. But were they malevolent entities in themselves, or simply the ancient gods of the earth that Yahweh needed to replace to consolidate his rule? It is possible that Yahweh was initially one of several gods, a local tribal warrior, and that over time he was elevated to the status of sole god in a slow and politically motivated theological construction. This would explain the frequently jealous and even violent tone of Yahweh in the scriptures, a God who demands exclusivity, who is enraged by the worship of others, who orders altars to be destroyed and entire villages to be killed for worshipping images. Let me ask you something. What do you think about everything you've heard so far? Do you feel there's something profound in this revelation? Leave me your comment about what this information is stirring in you. Your participation is crucial to ensuring this content reaches more people who need to hear this truth. Thank you so much for staying with this video this far. What's coming next is even more impressive, and I can assure you the best is yet to come. You need to understand that the Bible, as we know it today, is the result of selection, and every selection involves choice, and every choice involves intention. Contrary to popular belief, the Bible Bible didn't fall from the sky ready-made. It was assembled, yes, assembled, with parts included and others excluded. And who made these choices? Religious leaders, theologians, political figures, people with agendas, people who knew full well the impact certain texts could have. Texts that spoke of different gods, texts that revealed spiritual practices that didn't fit the mold they wanted to build, texts that, if they had been preserved, would completely change the way you see the spiritual world today. Among these texts are the so-called apocryphal books, those deliberately removed from the official versions of the Bible. The term apocryphal carries a weight of distrust, as if these books were false, suspect, almost heretical. But the truth is that many of them were respected, read and studied by entire communities before the canon was consolidated. And what do they offer? Revelations, connections, mysteries that the official version preferred to hide. Consider the Book of Enoch, for example. This is one of the most powerful and controversial texts ever discovered. In it, we find stories about fallen angels, known as the Watchers, who came to earth, taught humans, and were eventually punished for it. Enoch speaks of parallel spiritual realities, complex celestial structures, and forbidden knowledge that was passed down to mankind. Now think, why was such a profound and spiritual book excluded from the Bible? Who decided that? And why do so many churches prefer to pretend it doesn't even exist? Another example is the Gospel of Thomas. This text, attributed to one of Jesus's closest disciples, presents teachings that challenge the idea of an institutionalized Christ. In it, Jesus speaks of an inner light, a direct connection with the divine without the need for intermediaries. He says that the kingdom of God is within us, that we don't need to look far in temples or religious structures because everything is already here. This clashes head-on with the model of control adopted by many organized religions. And therein lies the answer. If the individual empowers, the system eliminates what empowers them. These texts and many others were not excluded for lack of faith. They were excluded for excess of spiritual power. They contained liberating information that revealed an authentic spirituality, often connected to ancestral traditions, including African ones, and that was dangerous for those who wanted to centralize power. Because a spiritually autonomous person does not submit easily, a person who knows they can speak directly to the divine, who recognizes ancient symbols, who feels the call of the ancestors, is a threat to any religion based on fear, guilt, and hierarchy. But it wasn't just the texts that disappeared. Silences were created, strategic silences, parts of the story of biblical figures that simply aren't told, like the long years of Jesus' youth. Why is nothing said about what he experienced between the ages of 12 and 30? Why so many gaps? What did he learn during this period? Who did he walk with? What traditions did he encounter? Some theologians believe he had contact with spiritual masters from other cultures, perhaps even African or Egyptian traditions. But this, of course, will never be officially acknowledged. There is also the archaeological evidence that many prefer to ignore. Excavations in ancient regions of Canaan, for example, have found altars, inscriptions, and ritual objects that show that Yahweh was worshipped alongside a consort, the goddess Asherah. Yes, you heard correctly. Yahweh had a spiritual wife. In some phases of early Hebrew history, there are ceramic plaques, stone records, and papyrus documents that mention Yahweh and his Asherah. That changes everything, doesn't it? But this kind of information is rarely taught in churches. Why? Because it destabilizes the image of Yahweh as solitary, exclusive, and absolute. It shows that even the tradition that proclaims itself monotheistic once went through a more pluralistic, more open phase, closer to the natural spirituality of ancient peoples. Except this was erased. These records were censored, ignored, or buried under the avalanche of orthodoxy. And the few scholars who dare to bring this evidence to light are often discredited, ridiculed, or silenced. Because the truth in this case isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. It questions the foundation upon which an entire spiritual structure was built. It invites people to think for themselves, to look beyond what they've been taught, to reconnect with older sources of wisdom, especially Black African ancestral sources that have always been marginalized. After everything we've explored so far, the black gods, the hidden texts, the historical erasures, we come to one of the most sensitive and at the same time most obvious parts of this spiritual plot, the representation of God. And here, I want to invite you to reflect calmly and deeply, because this question is not just aesthetic, it's symbolic, identity-based, and spiritually powerful. Because when we speak of God, we're not just talking about an abstract idea, but about the way the divine is perceived, signified, imagined, and especially taught. Now I ask you, why has the figure of God been whitewashed in so many Christianized cultures and religions? Why does the image of the divine, whether as a father, a son, or a spirit, almost always appear with European features, light skin, blue or green eyes, and straight hair? Does God have a nationality? Does the supreme creator resemble a 16th century European? Or has the image of God been deliberately reconfigured throughout history to serve the interests of domination? The answer isn't just obvious, it's painful. Yes, there was a spiritual colonization that went beyond the imposition of religious doctrines. It was a colonization of the image, a conscious and systematic project to Eurocentrize the sacred. And why does this matter so much? Because the way you imagine God directly affects the way you see yourself. And if God is white, then the standard of holiness, purity, perfection, and authority is also white. And anything that deviates from this standard is automatically seen as inferior, impure, suspicious, or even demonic. This is how spiritual racism is installed, silently, within prayers, within temples, in paintings, in stained glass windows, on altars, in images of saints. Gradually the message is repeated. What is divine resembles the oppressor, and what is black, what is African, what comes from ancestry, needs to be rejected, corrected, or converted. And this isn't theory, it's practical, it's real. Just look at the most popular images of Jesus. How many movies, paintings, sculptures, and books portray Jesus as a white man with light eyes, light brown hair, and European features? This, although historically absurd, is accepted without question by most people. But why did they accept this image? Because it was taught, repeated, and reinforced for centuries. It was built by European artists, financed by European churches, imposed by European governments, and exported along with the Crusades, colonization, and missionaries. And so gradually, the black Jesus, the African God, and the dark-skinned saints were erased from the collective imagination. This was done with such skill that today many black people feel disconnected from spirituality precisely because they don't see themselves represented in the divine. They feel that God is distant, that he doesn't look like them, that he doesn't understand their pain, their history, their identity. This is spiritual violence. The colonization of the sacred did something even deeper. It created a perverse association between skin color and proximity to God. If God is white, then white is closer to him and black is farther away. This was unconsciously absorbed by generations and generations. Black children growing up in Sunday schools where all the images were white. Black adults hearing that their culture was pagan, that their symbols were evil, that their ancestors were idolaters. Now think of the impact this has on the soul of a people. An entire people conditioned to reject their own image when they think of the divine. A people taught to bow down before a God who doesn't resemble them. A people convinced that to be accepted by God, they must become spiritually white. This isn't just religious colonization, it's colonization of the soul. And you wonder how this visual transformation happened? Slowly and strategically. First with images of saints, then with sacred art painted by European artists who portrayed God, and biblical figures with the faces of their kings, their neighbors, their own features. It wasn't an attempt at historical accuracy, it was an exercise in power. Then came catechesis, where colonized peoples were indoctrinated not only to accept the new faith, but also to reject anything reminiscent of their own traditions. And the most ironic thing is that there is no physical description of God in the Bible, which means the image was invented, created, and not just created, but standardized. Standardized so intensely that today, even knowing that Jesus was Jewish, born in the Middle East, in a region with dark skin, curly hair, and Semitic features, people still resist the idea that he could resemble a black man. Now that you've seen how the image of God was whitewashed, how symbols were distorted, and how texts were erased, it's time to address an even deeper issue, the breaking of the link with original black spirituality. And this rupture wasn't merely symbolic. It was a violent, systematic, and carefully constructed conducted rupture between the people and their most ancestral spiritual roots. Because before anything else, before the colonization of faith, before imported images, before imposed dogmas, there existed a living, vibrant spirituality directly connected to the body, soul, and nature. It was a spirituality that didn't depend on temples, pastors, or priests. It was a spirituality that happened in every breath, every footstep, every heartbeat. African and Afro-descendant peoples have always had an integrated vision of the sacred. They did not view the body as sin, as an obstacle or hindrance to the soul, as so many Christian doctrines later preached. The body was a temple. It was an expression of the divine. To dance was to pray. To sing was to invoke. To eat was to consecrate. To drum was to align oneself with the rhythm of the universe. Emotions were not signs of spiritual weakness, but portals to understanding oneself and the invisible world. The sacred wasn't distant up in the clouds. The sacred was here, now, in the sweat, in the tears, in the damp earth after the rain. It was in the drum that beat like a heart, in the fire that warmed and transformed, in the breath of the wind that carried the voice of the ancestors. But what happened to this spirituality? What became of it? What was put in its place? The answer is one of humanity's greatest spiritual tragedies. It was replaced by a separatist faith. They separated the body from the soul. They separated man from nature. They separated the spiritual from the physical. They separated the individual from his community. And above all, they separated the believer from his own inner power. They created intermediaries between man and God. They created rules that imprison rather than liberate. They replaced sacred dance with silence in church pews. They replaced healing rituals with exorcism sessions. They replaced drums with European organs and choirs. They replaced the warmth of African spirituality with the coldness of imported dogmas. And all this was sold as salvation. But salvation from what, if the soul was already connected to the source? Black spirituality was demonized. The Orishas, the Nkaisis, the Vodun, all treated as demons, as evil entities. Ancestral rituals once celebrated in broad daylight began to be performed in secret for fear of repression, violence, and ridicule. People began to feel ashamed of their practices, their chants, their symbols, and gradually lost their memory. They began to think their roots were a curse when they had always been a blessing. And all of this comes at a price, because when a person disconnects from their spiritual roots, they become weaker. When they don't know where they come from, they become lost. When they don't recognize the divine within their own bodies, they become vulnerable to any voice that screams louder. And that was exactly what the system wanted: a spiritually dismembered people, no longer able to connect without relying on someone to intercede. And so, once again, control was established. Have you noticed how difficult it is for many people to accept that the sacred can be found in a drum wheel, that the divine can manifest in the contact of one's feet with the earth, that a herbal bath can be a living prayer? It's difficult because we were taught to distrust everything that comes from our roots. We were taught that what is spiritual needs to be European, clean, silent, contained. But spirituality is not containment. Spirituality is expansion. It is flow. It is presence. It is power. The ancients knew this. They knew that by honoring nature, they were honoring the divine. That by caring for the body, they were caring for the temple. That by invoking the ancestors, they were accessing wisdom. This was the original black spirituality. A spirituality that empowers, heals, and liberates. A spirituality that doesn't need institutional approval because it's already born legitimate. It's passed on in the blood, in the gaze of a grandmother, in the story told around the fire. And despite every attempt to erase it, the memory still pulsed. It pulsed in the popular festivals, in the touches that endure, in the words that return, in the names that are reborn. It pulsed in you who are here listening to this and feeling that something inside you is awakening, a desire for reunion, for reconnection. But to rescue this ancestral spirituality, we need to begin with spiritual self-knowledge. It means beginning to look inward with courage, asking ourselves, what do I really believe? What makes sense to me? What symbols resonate with me? What practices resonate with my soul? We were often taught to follow a faith that never listened to us, a faith that commanded silence, obedience, and repetition. But spiritual self-knowledge requires the opposite: listening, feeling, and questioning. awakening. Allow yourself to discover that perhaps your faith isn't in a European altar, but in the palms of your hands, in the sound of the drum, in the story your grandmother told, in the smell of food made with intention, in the hug that heals. If you've come this far with an open heart, feeling every word, every revelation, then I can only thank you deeply. This means your soul is moving, your spirit is awakening, and you're ready to continue this journey with me. Now's the time to strengthen this connection. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, click the subscribe button and hit the bell right now. This is your space to watch. If you've come this far with an open heart, feeling every word, every revelation, then I can only thank you deeply. This means your soul is moving, your spirit is awakening, and you're ready to continue this journey with me. Now is the time to strengthen this connection. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, click the subscribe button and hit the bell right now. This is your safe space to explore truths the world prefers to keep hidden. But your journey of spiritual awakening doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning, because recognizing the truth about the dark gods before Yahweh is only the first step toward a much deeper reunion with yourself. It's time to ask yourself, what are you going to do with this information now? Are you going to keep it a secret that only you know? Or are you going to allow it to completely transform your relationship with the sacred? Because the truth you've just discovered isn't just historical information. It's spiritual medicine. It's the antidote to centuries of disconnection, confusion, and searching in the wrong places. For too long, too many people have walked through life feeling like something was missing spiritually. They tried religions, followed pastors, and searched for answers in temples that never fully satisfied them. And now you know why. Because they were seeking their connection to the divine in traditions never designed for them. They were seeking their face in mirrors that only reflected the image of the spiritual colonizer. But when you recognize that the sacred has always been in your roots, that the gods who truly understand you carry your skin color, your history, your pain, and your power, everything changes. The external search becomes internal recognition. Now, I want to talk to you about something you might be feeling right now. A strange sensation, as if something dormant inside you were awakening, as if every word in this video were triggering memories you didn't know you had. This is no coincidence. This is ancestral consciousness moving through your blood. It's the wisdom of your ancestors whispering in your ear. It's about time. It's about time you remembered who you really are. Because the information you've just received isn't new to your soul. Your soul has always known it. It has always felt the falseness of whitewashed images, always resisted the dogmas that imprisoned it, always sought something more authentic, more true, more connected to your essence. What happens is that your mind was conditioned to distrust these impulses. You were taught that doubting established religion was dangerous, that questioning traditional images of God was sinful, that exploring your spiritual roots was witchcraft. But now you have the tools to distinguish between programmed fear and authentic wisdom. Now you know that what you always felt wasn't rebellion without a cause. It was your spirit calling you back home. And home isn't a physical place. Home is that deep connection to the sacred that honors your identity, your history, your power. Home is knowing that you don't need to translate your spirituality to make it acceptable to others. Home is understanding that the ancestors who came before you weren't lost pagans waiting to be saved. They were spiritual teachers, bearers of wisdom, connectors between worlds, and that wisdom runs through your veins. But recognizing this truth is just the beginning. The next step is integrating it into your daily life. And this is where many people get lost, because they've spent so much time following external rules that they've forgotten how to listen to their internal compass. Spiritual liberation doesn't mean abandoning all structure or discipline. It means developing the ability to discern which structures serve you and which limit you. It means creating your own spiritual practice based on what truly works for you, not on what you've been told should work. Perhaps you will discover that your most powerful prayer is not repeating words from ancient books, but speaking directly to your ancestors in your own language. Perhaps you will find the sacred not in religious buildings, but in nature, in water, in fire, in the earth that supports your feet. You may realize that your healing comes not from confessing sins you never committed, but from honoring the wisdom of your body, from celebrating your identity, from recognizing that you are a unique expression of the divine. This is the path to spiritual liberation. Stop seeking external validation for your connection to the sacred and start trusting the validation that already exists within you. But this awakening isn't just individual, it's collective. Every person who reconnects with their authentic spiritual roots contributes to a larger movement of ancestral healing. Imagine a world where people no longer feel spiritually orphaned, a world where everyone knows their place in the greater fabric of existence, a world where spiritual diversity is celebrated, not suppressed. That world is possible, but it requires each of us to do our part. It requires courage to question what we've always taken for granted. It requires humility to learn from traditions that have been unjustly marginalized. It requires determination to heal the wounds that spiritual colonization left in our souls. And above all, it requires community, because this work of reconnection is too important and too profound to be done alone. That's why I invite you not only to reflect on what you've learned today, but to share it. Talk to your friends and family. Share this video with people you know who are also searching for authentic spiritual answers. Before we finish, I want you to know something very important. You are not a victim of history. You are the victorious product of an ancestral line that survived everything designed to destroy it. Every breath you take is proof that spiritual colonization has not completely triumphed. Every moment of questioning you feel is evidence that ancestral wisdom still pulses in your blood. Every time you choose authenticity over conformity, every time you honor your intuition over doctrine, every time you celebrate your identity instead of hiding it, you are continuing the work of spiritual resistance that your ancestors began centuries ago. Don't underestimate the power of your awakening. Don't minimize the importance of your quest. The simple fact that you've made it to the end of this video means there's something within you that refuses to accept watered-down versions of spiritual truth. Trust that something. Nurture it. Allow it to grow, because that something is your direct connection to the divine. And no one, no institution, no dogma, no system has the right to interfere with that connection. You are powerful. You are sacred. You are exactly who you were meant to be. And your authentic spirituality is a gift to both you and the world. If this content has touched your soul, if you felt that awakening we spoke of, then your next step is clear. Don't let this energy go to waste. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment sharing how you felt, what it sparked in you, and what questions arose. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. Your spiritual awakening is part of a global movement of reconnection with ancestral truth. And stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore, so much more to discover, so much more to heal. The journey toward complete spiritual liberation is just beginning. Until the next revelation, remember, the truth is within you. It always was. It was just waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Ashe, Akse, so be it.